I knew something was wrong the moment my husband suggested we celebrate our anniversary at the bank. Not at a restaurant, not on a beach somewhere. At the bank to update our joint account paperwork. He said just a formality, he said. Nothing to worry about, he said. I should have trusted my instincts right then. But after 19 years of marriage, you want to believe the best in someone. You want to think that the man who held your hand through your father's funeral and stayed up all night when your son had pneumonia is still that same person. You want to ignore the small voice in your head that whispers, something is very, very wrong here. My name is Catherine Brennan and I'm 43 years old. I run a small bookkeeping business from our home in Asheville, North Carolina, handling accounts for local contractors and small businesses. It's not glamorous work, but it's steady, and it allows me to be present for our 16-year-old son Lucas. My husband, Richard, works in commercial real estate development. At least, that's what he's always told me. He travels frequently, closes big deals, brings home a comfortable income. We live in a nice house in a good neighborhood. On paper, we're the picture of suburban success. But that morning, as Richard poured his coffee and casually mentioned stopping by the bank during our anniversary lunch, something in his tone made my stomach tighten. There was a careful quality to his voice, like he was reading from a script he'd rehearsed. Why do we need to update the paperwork? I asked, watching him over the rim of my own coffee mug. Oh, you know how banks are, he said with that easy smile I'd fallen in love with 2 decades ago. New regulations, updated beneficiary forms, all that administrative nonsense. Better to handle it now than deal with complications later. Later. The word hung in the air between us. Later when what? When one of us dies. When something goes wrong. The phrasing felt ominous, though I couldn't articulate why. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. That afternoon we drove to the bank in separate cars. Richard had a property showing afterward, he explained. And I needed to pick up Lucas from soccer practice. Made sense. Everything Richard suggested always made sense on the surface. That was part of the problem. The bank manager, a pleasant woman named Gloria, whom I'd never met before, greeted us warmly and ushered us into a private office. She laid out several documents on her desk, pointing to signature lines with a manicured finger. Just standard updates, she said, echoing Richard's earlier words. We're consolidating some accounts, streamlining the beneficiary designations, making everything more efficient. I picked up the first document and started reading. Richard's hand immediately covered mine. Honey, we don't need to read through every word. Gloria's walked us through everything. Just signatures. But I've been doing bookkeeping for 15 years. Reading financial documents isn't just part of my job. It's my superpower. And something about these papers made my professional instincts scream. I'd like to read them anyway, I said quietly, pulling my hand away from his. I saw something flicker across Richard's face. Annoyance, anxiety. It was gone so quickly I might have imagined it, but Gloria's smile tightened slightly, and she exchanged a glance with my husband that I definitely didn't imagine. The first document was straightforward enough, updating our mailing address for statements, which we changed 6 months ago when we refinanced the house. The second document made me pause. It was transferring signatory authority on our primary savings account, the one where we kept our emergency fund and Lucas's college money. According to the paperwork, I was being removed as a co-owner and changed to an authorized user. What's the difference? I asked, looking up at Richard. No practical difference, he said quickly. It's just a technicality for tax purposes. Gloria explained it all before you arrived. But I knew there was a difference, a big one. As a co-owner, I had equal rights to the account. As an authorized user, Richard could revoke my access at any time. He would have sole control. I don't understand why we need to change this, I said, setting down the pen. Our current arrangement has worked fine for 19 years. Richard's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Catherine, you're making this more complicated than it needs to be. We're trying to protect our assets, create cleaner estate planning. This is what our financial advisor recommended. What financial advisor? We don't have a financial advisor. The silence that followed was heavy with something I couldn't quite name. Richard and Gloria exchanged another look, and I realized with a cold certainty that they'd had conversations about my accounts, my money, my financial life without me present. "I'm not signing this," I said, pushing the papers back across the desk. Richard's expression hardened. "Catherine, don't be difficult. This is for our family's benefit. Then you won't mind if I have my own attorney review these documents first, just to make sure I understand all the implications." I watched my husband's face cycle through several emotions: frustration, calculation, and finally a forced calm that was somehow more unsettling than anger would have been. "Of course," he said through a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Take all the time you need. We can reschedule when you're more comfortable." As we left the bank, Richard kissed my cheek and headed to his supposed property showing. I sat in my car for a long moment, staring at the copies of the documents Gloria had given me, my hands trembling slightly on the steering wheel. Something was very wrong. And for the first time in our marriage, I was going to find out what. I didn't go straight home. Instead, I drove to the public library downtown and found a quiet corner table far from the circulation desk. I spread out the bank documents and read through them carefully, line by line. The way I would review a client's books when something didn't add up. The more I read, the worse it got. The changes weren't just about signatory authority. There were references to other accounts I didn't recognize, routing numbers for banks we didn't use, beneficiary designations that listed Richard's sister, whom I barely spoke to, as a secondary on accounts I thought were jointly held. I pulled out my phone and logged into our online banking. Our checking account showed a balance that seemed right, matching what I expected from Richard's last paycheck deposit and my business income. But when I tried to access our savings account, the one with Lucas's college fund, I got an error message. "Access restricted. Please contact your branch." My heart started pounding. I tried our investment account next. Same message. Then our money market account. Restricted. 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 I called the bank's customer service line, but the automated system wouldn't let me through to a person without an account number that I apparently no longer had access to. I tried 3 more times, each attempt making me more frustrated and more frightened. Finally, I called my friend Michelle, who worked as a paralegal at a law firm specializing in family law. We'd known each other since college, and she was one of the few people I trusted completely. "Michigan, I need advice and I need you to not tell me I'm overreacting. What's wrong?" Her voice immediately shifted to concerned professional mode. I explained the bank visit, the documents, the restricted access to accounts. As I talked, I could hear her typing in the background. "Catherine, listen to me carefully," she said when I finished. "Don't sign anything. Don't agree to anything. Don't let Richard know that you're suspicious and get yourself a lawyer. Not tomorrow. Today. You're scaring me." "But you should be scared. What you're describing sounds like someone systematically locking you out of your own money. And if Richard's doing this without your full understanding and consent, that's financial abuse. It's a form of domestic abuse." Catherine, the word abuse hit me like cold water. Richard had never raised his hand to me. He'd never even raised his voice, really. He was charming, successful, well-liked in our community. Abuse was something that happened to other people in other marriages. Not to me, not to us. "I think you're jumping to conclusions," I said weakly. "There could be a reasonable explanation. Maybe, but you need to protect yourself while you find out what that explanation is. I'm texting you the name of an attorney, Janet Corso. She's the best. Call her right now and tell her I sent you." After I hung up, I sat in my car in the library parking lot, staring at the contact information Michelle had sent. Part of me wanted to drive home, make dinner, pretend this afternoon had never happened, wait for Richard to explain everything in a way that made sense. But a larger part of me, the part that had built a successful business by trusting my instincts about numbers and people, knew that Michelle was right. Something was happening, and I needed to understand what before it was too late. I called Janet Corso. Her assistant answered and tried to schedule me for the following week. But when I mentioned Michelle's name and said it was urgent, she put me on hold. 60 seconds later, Janet herself picked up. Michelle says, "You need help today. Tell me what's happening." I explained everything again. The bank visit, the documents, the restricted accounts. Janet listened without interrupting, and I could hear her pen scratching notes. "How much money are we talking about?" she asked when I finished. "The savings account has about 85,000. The investment account should have around 200,000. The money market has another 40,000 plus our checking account, but that's usually just a few thousand at any given time. So, your husband is potentially trying to isolate you from access to over $300,000. Hearing the number out loud made it real in a way it hadn't been before. That was our money. Money I'd helped earn through my business. Money we'd saved together for Lucas's education and our retirement. Money that was supposed to be ours, not his. "Can you come to my office right now?" Janet asked. "I have a meeting at 4, but I can fit you in before that if you come immediately." 20 minutes later, I was sitting in Janet Corso's office on the 14th floor of a downtown high-rise. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So, if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Looking out at a view of the mountains that I was too anxious to appreciate. Janet was younger than I'd expected, maybe late 30s, with short dark hair and an intensity that made me sit up straighter. "First things first," she said, opening her laptop. "We need to document everything. Every account, every conversation, every document you've been asked to sign. I need dates, times, exact wording if you can remember it." For the next 45 minutes, I walked her through not just today's events, but everything I could remember from the past year that had felt off. Richard's increasing secrecy about finances. His insistence on handling all our tax paperwork alone, even though I was a bookkeeper and had always prepared our taxes. His new habit of receiving bank statements at his office instead of our home. The way he'd started making major purchases, a new truck, expensive golf clubs, a boat we kept at the marina without discussing them with me first. "Has he ever suggested you stop working?" Janet asked. "Thought about that. Not directly, but he's mentioned several times that my business doesn't bring in as much as it used to. That I should consider scaling back, spending more time at home with Lucas, even though Lucas is 16 and barely home himself. And has your business income actually decreased?" "Well, if anything, it's increased. I took on 3 new clients this year." Janet made a note. "He's trying to establish a narrative. If he's planning to divorce you or gain financial control, he needs to show that you're not contributing significantly to the household income. That makes it easier to argue that the assets should be primarily his divorce." The word came out as a whisper. "We're not getting divorced. We just celebrated our 19th anniversary." Janet's expression softened slightly. "Catherine, I'm not trying to scare you. I'm trying to prepare you. In my experience, when someone starts secretly restructuring joint accounts and restricting their spouse's access to money, it's usually because they're planning something. Might be divorce. Might be something else. But it's never nothing." She pulled out a fresh legal pad. "Here's what we're going to do. First, I'm going to draft a letter to your bank stating that you do not consent to any changes to your joint accounts and requesting immediate restoration of your access. Second, I'm going to request copies of all recent transactions and any documents Richard may have signed without you. Third, we're going to run a comprehensive check on your credit report and financial history to see if there's anything else you don't know about." "This feels extreme," I said. "What if there's a reasonable explanation? What if I'm ruining my marriage over a misunderstanding?" Janet leaned forward, her expression serious. "Catherine, I've been practicing family law for 12 years. I've seen hundreds of cases of financial abuse. They all start exactly like this, with a spouse who seems reasonable on the surface making small changes that seem logical, explaining things in ways that almost make sense until one day the victim realizes they have no access to money, no ability to leave, no financial independence at all. Don't let Richard's charm or your history together blind you to what might be happening right now." I felt tears burning behind my eyes. I love him. I've loved him for 20 years. I know, and maybe there is a reasonable explanation. Maybe this is all a misunderstanding. But you need to protect yourself while you find out. Love doesn't require you to be financially vulnerable. Love doesn't ask you to sign away your access to your own money without fully understanding why. I left Janet's office with a folder full of documents to review and a plan of action that felt both necessary and terrifying. As I drove home, I kept replaying the afternoon in my mind, looking for the moment when my comfortable, predictable life had shifted into something unrecognizable. Lucas was already home when I walked in, sprawled on the couch with his laptop, supposedly doing homework, but probably watching videos. How was the anniversary lunch? I'd completely forgotten that's what today was supposed to be. An anniversary celebration. Instead, it had been the day I discovered I might not know my husband at all. Was fine, honey. Where's your father? Still at work, I guess. He texted that he'd be late. Something about a deal closing. I went to the kitchen and started preparing dinner. Mechanically, my mind elsewhere. I thought about the years of marriage, the life we'd built together, Richard proposing on a beach in Hilton Head, our small wedding with just family and close friends, the day Lucas was born, and how Richard had cried when he held him for the first time, buying this house, building our life. Had any of it been real, or had I been living in a carefully constructed illusion? My phone buzzed with a text from Richard. Running late. Don't wait up. Love you. I stared at those two words, love you, and wondered if they meant anything at all. That night, after Lucas went to bed, I did something I'd never done in 19 years of marriage. I went into Richard's home office and started looking through his papers. The office was Richard's domain, always kept locked when he wasn't there. But I'd seen where he kept the key in a fake rock in the landscaping by our front door. He thought I didn't know about it. He was wrong. My hand shook as I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The office was neat, organized, professional, exactly what you'd expect from a successful real estate developer. I sat down at his desk and opened the first drawer. Tax returns neatly filed. Client contracts, property listings. Everything looked legitimate, normal. But I kept searching, driven by an instinct I couldn't name. In the bottom drawer, hidden under a stack of old property surveys, I found a second phone. Not Richard's regular iPhone, but a cheap prepaid flip phone that looked like something from a spy movie. My heart pounding. Opened it. There were text messages, dozens of them, to and from numbers I didn't recognize. I scrolled through them, my breath coming faster with each new screen. Meeting confirmed for Friday. Bring the documentation. The wife doesn't suspect anything. Moving forward as planned, account transfer complete, remaining balance secure. I felt like I was falling, like the floor had dropped out from under me. This wasn't about updating bank paperwork. This wasn't about estate planning. Richard was planning something, and he'd been planning it for a while. I took photos of every text message with my own phone, my hands shaking so badly I had to take some of them twice. Then I carefully replaced everything exactly as I'd found it. Locked the office and put the key back in the fake rock. In my own bedroom, in the house I'd thought of as my home, I lay awake all night, staring at the ceiling and wondering who the man sleeping next to me really was. The next morning, Richard was cheerful at breakfast, chatting with Lucas about an upcoming basketball game, asking me about my day schedule. He was the same husband he'd always been. Attentive, pleasant, normal. But now I was watching him differently, seeing the performance underneath the familiar gestures. I've been thinking about the bank paperwork, he said casually as he poured coffee. I know it made you uncomfortable yesterday. Maybe we should have our accountant explain the tax benefits more clearly. Would that help? We didn't have an accountant. We'd always done our taxes ourselves. But I just smiled and nodded. That would be great. When were you thinking? How about Monday? I'll set up a meeting. Monday was 4 days away. 4 days for me to figure out what was really happening. 4 days to decide what to do about it. After Richard left for work and Lucas left for school, I called Janet Corso. I found something, I said without preamble. Burner phone. Text messages about moving money, about me not suspecting anything. Janet, what is he planning? Send me photos of everything you found. And Catherine, be very careful. If Richard realizes you know something's wrong, He might accelerate whatever he's planning. I spent the morning working on client books, trying to focus on normal tasks while my mind raced with questions. Around noon, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Mrs. Brennan, this is Detective Marcus Webb with the Asheville Police Department Financial Crimes Unit. I need to speak with you about your husband, Richard Brennan. How soon can you come to the station? My blood turned to ice. What is this about? I'd rather discuss it in person. But Mrs. Brennan, I need you to understand that you're not in any trouble. We just need information that might help us with an ongoing investigation. An investigation into my husband. Please come to the station. The sooner the better. I hung up and immediately called Janet. The police just called. They want to talk to me about Richard. Don't go alone. I'm coming with you. Meet me at the station in 1 hour. The police station was nothing like I'd imagined from watching crime shows. It was bureaucratic and beige, smelling faintly of coffee and industrial cleaner. Detective Webb met us in the lobby, a man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair and tired eyes that had seen too much. He led us to a conference room and gestured for us to sit. Then he opened a folder and spread several photographs across the table. Do you recognize any of these people? Yes. I looked at the photos. They showed Richard in various locations, restaurants, coffee shops, what looked like a parking garage, always with the same man. A younger guy, maybe early 30s, wearing expensive suits. I've never seen him before. Who is he? Detective Webb leaned back in his chair. His name is Marcus Chun. He's a financial consultant with a very specialized practice. He helps wealthy individuals move money offshore, restructure assets to hide them from taxes or legal judgments, and create complex corporate entities designed to obscure ownership. Felt dizzy. I don't understand. Why would Richard need to hide money? We're not wealthy. We're comfortable. But Mrs. Brennan, when was the last time you looked at your husband's business accounts? His real estate company's financial records. Richard handles all of that. I focus on my bookkeeping clients. And you've never wondered why a commercial real estate developer working primarily in North Carolina would need to make regular trips to the Cayman Islands, or why he's incorporated shell companies in Delaware, Nevada, and Wyoming. The room seemed to tilt around me. I don't know what you're talking about. Detective Webb pulled out another document. Your husband has been under investigation for 14 months. We believe he's been running a real estate investment fraud scheme, convincing investors to put money into development projects that either don't exist or are vastly overvalued. We estimate he's defrauded investors of somewhere between 8 and 12 million. The number was so large it didn't feel real. $12 million. That was Hollywood money, lottery money, not suburban North Carolina life money. There must be a mistake. I heard myself saying Richard wouldn't. He couldn't. We have bank records, Mrs. Brennan. Wire transfers, email communications, investor statements showing promised returns that never materialized. We have enough evidence to arrest your husband, but we're hoping you can help us locate where the money went. I looked at Janet, desperate for her to make sense of this. She was reading through the documents Webb had provided, her expression growing grimmer with each page. My client had no knowledge of any of this, Janet said firmly. She runs her own legitimate business and maintains separate finances. She's a victim here, not a co-conspirator. We believe that, Webb said, looking at me with something that might have been sympathy. But Mrs. Brennan, your husband has been systematically moving money for over 2 years. He's created a web of shell corporations and offshore accounts and, unfortunately, several of those accounts are in your name. The words didn't make sense. In my name. That's impossible. I never signed anything. Are you sure about that? Webb asked gently. Think about the past few years. Has your husband ever asked you to sign documents without explaining them fully? Tax forms, business paperwork, anything that seemed routine at the time. I thought back the tax returns Richard had me sign electronically last year, saying it was easier than paper filing, the business documents he brought home from the office, needing my signature as a spouse for some kind of certification, the insurance forms, the investment paperwork. Oh God, the investment paperwork. There was something I said slowly. About 6 months ago, Richard said he was setting up a retirement account through his business. He needed me to sign as a beneficiary, but it was so much paperwork and he said it was just standard legal language, so I just signed where he pointed. Webb nodded grimly. We found that account. It's registered in your name as the primary holder with your signature on the opening documents. It received wire transfers totaling $2 million from 6 different investors. The money stayed in the account for less than 48 hours before being transferred to an offshore entity. $2 million in my name in an account I never knew existed. This can't be happening, I whispered. I'm afraid it is, Webb said. And Mrs. Brennan, I need to be very direct with you. When we arrest your husband, which will happen within the next few days, those investors are going to come after anyone associated with this fraud to try to recover their money. Your name is on documents. You sign forms. Even if you didn't know what you were signing, you could be held liable. The room felt like it was closing in on me. My husband was a criminal, a fraud. He'd used me to help steal millions of dollars from people, and now I was going to be punished for it. What do I do? I asked, looking between Janet and Detective Webb. How do I fix this? You cooperate fully with our investigation. Webb said, you provide us with any information you have about your husband's activities, his accounts, his business dealings. You demonstrate that you were an unwitting participant, not a willing accomplice. Janet put her hand on my arm, and you protect yourself legally and financially. As of right now, Catherine, you need to assume that everything you thought you knew about your life is wrong. I drove home in a daze, Janet's words echoing in my head. Everything I thought I knew was wrong. My marriage was a lie. My husband was a criminal. My financial security was an illusion. Even my home might not really be mine if Richard had used it as collateral for his schemes. When I pulled into the driveway, Richard's truck was already there. He was home early, which never happened. My heart started racing as I walked through the door. He was sitting at the kitchen table, and I knew immediately that he knew. Maybe not that I'd been to the police station, but definitely that something had changed. We need to talk, he said. And with those 4 words, my old life ended and something new. Something terrifying and uncertain began. I stood in the doorway of my own kitchen, suddenly feeling like an intruder in my own home. Richard's face was unreadable, but there was a tension in his shoulders I'd never seen before. He gestured to the chair across from him, and I sat down slowly, keeping the table between us like a barrier. Where were you this afternoon? He asked. His voice was calm, conversational even. But underneath it, I could hear something sharp. Running errands. Why? You weren't at the library working like you usually do on Thursdays. My pulse quickened. How did he know I wasn't at the library? Had he driven by looking for me? Was he tracking me somehow? I had some personal business to attend to, I said carefully. Is that a problem? Richard studied me for a long moment, his fingers drumming once, twice on the table. Catherine, I think we both know something shifted yesterday at the bank. You've been different since then. Distant, suspicious. Can you blame me? You tried to change our account structure without properly explaining why. You had conversations with the bank manager about my finances without me present. Our finances, he corrected. And I was trying to protect us. Protect our family. From what? The question hung in the air between us. I watched emotions flicker across his face. Calculation, frustration, and something else I couldn't quite identify. Fear, maybe from complications. He finally said, Catherine, my business is growing. I'm dealing with larger investors, bigger projects. There are liability issues, legal protections we need to put in place. Separating certain assets is standard practice in commercial real estate. Sounded reasonable. It almost made sense. But I'd spent the afternoon learning that my husband had stolen millions of dollars, that he'd created fake companies and offshore accounts, that he'd forged documents in my name. Nothing about our life was standard anymore. I want to see your business records, I said. Richard's expression hardened. Excuse me, your company records, financial statements, client contracts. I want to see everything. Why would you suddenly need to see my business paperwork? You've never been interested in the development side before. I'm interested now. If you want me to sign documents that affect our family's financial security, I need to understand what I'm signing. That seems reasonable, doesn't it? We stared at each other across the kitchen table, and I realized we were having two completely different conversations. On the surface, we were discussing business transparency. Underneath, we were engaged in something else entirely. A careful dance of suspicion and deflection, each of us trying to figure out how much the other knew. "I'll put together a summary for you," Richard said finally. "But Catherine, I need you to trust me. I need you to understand that everything I've done has been to build a better life for our family." "Then show me. If there's nothing to hide, show me the records." Richard stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "I have calls to make. We'll talk about this later." He walked out of the kitchen, and a moment later I heard his office door close. Then the distinctive click of the lock engaging. I sat alone at the kitchen table, my hands shaking. That conversation had accomplished nothing except to confirm that Richard knew I was on to something. And now he was in his office, probably moving money, destroying evidence, or calling his accomplices to warn them. I pulled out my phone and texted Janet. "He knows something's wrong. What do I do?" Her response came within seconds. "Document everything, every conversation, every strange behavior. Keep acting as normal as possible. The arrest is coming soon, and you need to make sure you're clearly separate from his activities." Acting normal. How was I supposed to act normal when my entire world had just imploded? How was I supposed to make dinner and help Lucas with homework and pretend everything was fine when my husband was a criminal who'd used me to steal millions of dollars? But I did it anyway. I cooked pasta, Richard's favorite, ironically. I set the table. When Lucas came home from basketball practice, CS, and pretended my heart wasn't pounding with anxiety, Richard emerged from his office at dinner time. His expression. I asked about his day and listened to his story about a three-pointer he'd made during scrimmage. I smiled and laughed in the right places and pretended my heart wasn't pounding with anxiety. Richard emerged from his office at dinner time. His expression carefully neutral. We ate together as a family, discussing Lucas's upcoming tournament. The weather, trivial, normal things. And the whole time I was watching Richard watch me, both of us performing normally while everything underneath was chaos. That night after Lucas went to bed, I lay awake in the darkness while Richard slept beside me or pretended to sleep. I couldn't tell anymore what was real and what was performance. Around 2 o'clock in the morning, I heard him get up. I kept my eyes closed, my breathing steady as he moved quietly around the bedroom. I heard the soft sound of his office door opening and closing. I waited 5 minutes, then slipped out of bed and crept down the hallway. A thin line of light showed under his office door. I pressed my ear against it, straining to hear. Richard's voice was low, urgent, moving too fast. "She's asking questions about the business records. I think she might know something." Silence while whoever was on the other end responded. "No, there's no way she could have found out about the accounts. I've been too careful. But something spooked her at the bank yesterday." More silence. "Friday. That's too soon. I need more time to secure everything." My heart was pounding so loud I was afraid he could hear it through the door. "Fine, Friday, but if this blows up, it's on you." I heard movement and quickly retreated to the bedroom, sliding under the covers just as the office door opened. Richard came back to bed and I felt the mattress shift as he lay down. "I know you're awake," he said quietly. I froze, keeping my eyes closed, my breathing even. "Catherine, I know you heard that conversation. We need to talk. Really talk in the morning." I didn't respond, didn't move, barely breathed. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, I heard his breathing deepen and slow. This time he really was asleep. I lay there in the darkness replaying his words. Friday, something was happening Friday. Something he'd been planning. And whatever it was, he thought it was happening too soon now because I was asking questions. Friday was 2 days away. As soon as the first gray light of dawn filtered through our bedroom curtains, I got up and got dressed. Richard was still asleep or pretending to be. I grabbed my purse and keys and left the house before he could wake up and ask where I was going. I drove straight to Janet's office, even though it was barely 6 o'clock in the morning. To my surprise, her car was already in the parking garage. I took the elevator to the 14th floor and found her office door unlocked. Lights on. Janet herself sitting at her desk surrounded by folders and legal documents. "You're here early," she said, looking up as I walked in. "So are you." "I've been here all night, actually." "Catherine, sit down. We have a lot to discuss." She poured me coffee from a carafe on her desk, and I noticed her hands were shaking slightly. Whatever she discovered had shaken even her professional composure. "I've been reviewing the documents Detective Webb provided along with some additional research my investigator conducted." "Catherine, this is worse than we thought." "Much worse." "How can it possibly be worse than my husband stealing $12 million? Because it's not 12 million. It's closer to 19 million. And the scheme has been running for almost 5 years, not 2. Your husband started small with legitimate real estate deals that actually existed. That's how he built credibility with investors. But for the past 3 years, he's been creating entirely fictional projects, fake property listings, forged permits, fabricated construction timelines. He even created a network of fake subcontractors, shell companies he controls to make it look like work was being done." Felt sick. How did no one notice? Because he's brilliant at what he does. He targeted investors who live out of state, people who wanted exposure to the North Carolina real estate market, but couldn't easily verify the projects. He provided regular updates, professional look progress reports, even staged photos of construction sites. And he was paying early investors' returns using money from new investors. It's a classic Ponzi scheme. Dressed up in real estate clothing. But Ponzi schemes always collapse. Everyone knows that. And your husband knew it too. That's what makes this particularly calculating. He's been preparing his exit strategy for at least a year. The offshore accounts, the shell companies, the systematic restructuring of your marital assets. He's been getting ready to disappear. The word hung in the air between us. Disappear. You think he's planning to run? I think he's planning to take the money and vanish. Probably to a country without an extradition treaty with the United States, the Cayman Islands, maybe Panama, Dubai. Somewhere he can live comfortably on $19 million while his investors and his family deal with the aftermath. But what about Lucas? What about me? He wouldn't just abandon us. Janet's expression was pitying. Catherine, he's been systematically removing you from access to your own money. He tried to get you to sign documents that would have left you with nothing. He's been having secret conversations with offshore financial consultants. Everything he's done in the past year has been about separating himself from you financially and legally. I'm sorry, but yes, I think he absolutely would abandon you. I thought about the burner phone, the late-night conversation I'd overheard Friday. Something was happening Friday. "He's leaving this Friday," I said suddenly. I heard him on the phone last night. He was talking to someone about Friday being too soon, but he agreed to it anyway. That's when he's planning to run. Janet's eyes widened. Friday. That's 48 hours from now. She immediately picked up her phone and dialed. Detective Webb. It's Janet Corso. We have a timeline issue you need to know about. While Janet talked to the detective, I sat in her office and tried to process what my life had become. My husband wasn't just a criminal. He was planning to run away, to leave me and Lucas to face the consequences of his crimes. To leave us with nothing while he lived comfortably in some tropical paradise. How had I missed this? How had I lived with this man for 19 years, shared his bed, raised a child with him, and never seen what he really was? Janet hung up and turned back to me. Detective Webb is moving the arrest to tomorrow. They can't risk waiting until Friday. Richard will be taken into custody sometime Thursday afternoon. Tomorrow, I repeated numbly. My husband is going to be arrested tomorrow. And when that happens, Catherine, everything is going to move very fast. The investors will file civil suits. The federal government will freeze any accounts connected to Richard. Your house might be seized as an asset purchased with stolen money. Lucas's college fund could be frozen. You need to be prepared for your life to get much worse before it gets better. How do I prepare for that? How do I prepare to tell my 16-year-old son that his stepfather is a criminal? That we might lose our house? That everything we thought was real was a lie? By being strong. By focusing on protecting yourself and Lucas. By remembering that you're a victim here too. I left Janet's office with instructions to act completely normal for the next 24 hours. Go home. Go through your routine. Don't let Richard suspect that anything has changed. Let him think he still has control. When I got home, Richard's truck was gone. A note on the kitchen counter said he'd gone to show a property and would be back late afternoon. I wondered if he was really showing property or if he was moving money, destroying evidence, preparing for his escape. I spent the morning working mechanically on client books, my mind elsewhere. Around noon, Lucas came home early from school. Teacher planning day, he reminded me when I looked surprised. He made himself a sandwich and settled on the couch with his laptop. Mom, can I ask you something? He said after a while. Course, honey. Is everything okay with you and Richard? The question caught me off guard. Why would you ask that? Lucas shrugged, not meeting my eyes. I don't know. You guys have been weird lately. Quiet. And last night at dinner, it felt like you were both pretending to be normal, if that makes sense. My son was more perceptive than I'd given him credit for. Of course, he'd noticed the tension. He'd been living in this house too, breathing the same poisoned air. Things are a little complicated right now, I said carefully. But whatever happens, you and I are going to be okay. You know that, right? He looked at me, then really looked at me, and I saw fear in his eyes. Are you getting divorced? I don't know. Maybe. Would that upset you? Lucas was quiet for a long moment. Richard's okay, I guess. He's never been mean to me or anything. But he's not my dad. My dad died when I was 3. I barely remember him. Richard's just the guy who married my mom. It was the most honest Lucas had ever been about his feelings toward Richard, and it broke my heart a little. I'd spent years trying to build a family, trying to make our blended household work, never realizing that Lucas had never fully accepted Richard as a father figure. I'm sorry, I said. I'm sorry I couldn't give you a better family. Mom, you are my family. You've always been enough. I just want you to be happy. And lately you haven't seemed happy. I pulled my son into a hug, fighting back tears. He was right. I hadn't been happy. I'd been anxious, confused, controlled. I just hadn't let myself acknowledge it until everything fell apart. That afternoon, Richard came home with takeout for dinner. Thai food from our favorite restaurant. He was cheerful, almost aggressively upbeat, telling stories about his day and asking Lucas about school. It was such a stark contrast to the tension of the previous night that it felt surreal. After dinner, Richard suggested we watch a movie together as a family. We settled on the couch, Lucas between us, and watched an action movie that I couldn't follow because my mind was racing with what tomorrow would bring. Around 10, Lucas went to bed. Richard poured himself a scotch and gestured to the back deck. Want to sit outside for a bit? It's a nice night. I followed him out into the cool evening air. We sat in the deck chairs we bought together 3 years ago, looking out at our darkened backyard. I'm sorry about how I handled things at the bank, Richard said after a long silence. You were right to question the paperwork. I should have been more transparent about why we needed to restructure things. Why did we need to restructure things? The truth is, Catherine, my business is in trouble. I made some bad investments back some projects that didn't pan out. I've been scrambling to cover losses, trying to protect our personal assets from potential lawsuits. That's why I wanted to move things around to put our house, our savings beyond the reach of business creditors. It was a good lie, smooth, plausible, with just enough vulnerability to make it seem honest. If I didn't know the truth, I might have believed it. How bad is it? I asked, playing along. Bad enough that we might need to sell the house. Downsize. Start over. Does Lucas know? Not yet. I wanted to tell you first. I wanted us to present a united front before we worried him. A united front. Even now, after everything, Richard was trying to manipulate me into being complicit in his lies, trying to make me his partner in deception. When were you planning to tell me all this? Yes. This weekend. I wanted to have a clear picture of our options first. This weekend after he'd already left the country with $19 million after he'd abandoned Lucas and me to deal with angry investors and federal investigators. The audacity of the lie was breathtaking. Richard, are you going somewhere on Friday? I watched his face carefully in the dim light from the house. Saw the flicker of surprise quickly suppressed. Friday. Well, why would I be going somewhere? I thought I heard you on the phone last night talking about Friday. You must have misheard. I have a property closing on Friday, but I'll be home Friday night. Why? Another lie delivered smoothly. And I realized something that should have been obvious before. Richard was good at this. The lying, the manipulation, the performance. He'd probably been doing it his entire life with everyone he encountered. I wasn't special. I was just the latest person he'd fooled. No reason, I said. Just making sure I have our schedule straight. We sat in silence for a while longer. Both of us pretending to enjoy the peaceful evening. Both of us knowing it was all an act. Finally, Richard said he was tired and headed inside. I stayed on the deck for another hour, staring at the stars and wondering how I'd ended up here. My phone buzzed with a text from Janet. Tomorrow afternoon between 2 to 4. Detective Webb will call before. Stay somewhere public with Lucas when it happens. You don't want to be home. I went inside and locked up the house, checking doors and windows with a thoroughness I'd never felt necessary before. In our bedroom, Richard was already in bed, his back to me. I changed into pajamas and slid under the covers, maintaining the careful distance between us that had developed over the past few days. Catherine, his voice came out of the darkness. Yes, I do love you. You know that, right? Whatever happens, whatever you hear about me or my business, I need you to know that what we have is real. I lay there in the darkness listening to my husband profess his love, knowing that in less than 24 hours he would be in handcuffs. Knowing that everything he just said was another lie. I know, I said, because it was easier than the truth. Thursday morning dawned gray and drizzly, matching my mood. Richard was up early, more energetic than I'd seen him in weeks. He made pancakes for breakfast, humming while he cooked, acting like everything was perfectly normal. I have that property closing this afternoon, he said over breakfast. Should be home by 6 o'clock or so. Maybe we can go out to dinner. The three of us. Sure, I said. That sounds nice. Lucas left for school at 7:30. Richard left at 8, kissing me goodbye at the door like he always did. I watched his truck pull out of the driveway and wondered if that would be the last time I saw him as a free man. At 9, my phone rang. Detective Webb, Mrs. Brennan. We're executing the arrest warrant this afternoon at 2 o'clock. We'll be taking him into custody at his office. I wanted to give you advance notice so you could prepare. What should I do? Be somewhere public when it happens. Somewhere with your son if possible. The media will likely show up at your house once the arrest is made public. You don't want to be there alone. After I hung up, I called Lucas's school and signed him out early, claiming a family emergency. Not a lie, technically. When he came out to the car, he looked worried. What's wrong? Is Grandma okay? My mother lived in Florida and Lucas always worried about her. Grandma's fine. I just need you to be with me this afternoon. I'll explain everything soon. We drove to the mall, the most public space I could think of. We had lunch at the food court, and I made small talk with my son while watching the time creep toward 2 o'clock. At exactly 2:15 my phone rang. Janet, it's done. Richard has been arrested. Detective Webb said it went smoothly. He didn't resist or try to run. They're processing him now. I felt like I should feel something. Relief, vindication, grief, but there was only numbness. What happens now? Now the circus begins. The arrest will be on the news within the hour. Investors will start coming forward. The federal government will begin asset forfeit proceedings. Catherine, you need to brace yourself. This is going to get very public very fast. I looked at Lucas, who was scrolling through his phone, oblivious to the fact that his life had just changed forever. I have to tell him. Do you want me there when you do? No, this is something I need to do alone. I hung up and turned to my son. Lucas, I need to talk to you about something important. Something about Richard. He looked up from his phone and I saw the exact moment when he realized something was seriously wrong. Mom, you're scaring me. What's going on? So I told him. I told him that Richard had been arrested for fraud, that he'd stolen millions of dollars from investors, that he'd been planning to leave the country and abandon us. I watched my 16-year-old son's face as I dismantled his understanding of his family, his home, his security. I don't understand, he said when I finished. Richard's a criminal. Like an actual criminal. And we're going to lose our house. We might. I don't know yet. There are a lot of legal complications to sort through. Lucas was quiet for a long time processing. Then he said, "Did you know? Is that why you've been acting weird? I only found out this week. The police told me. I've been trying to figure out how to protect us, how to make sure we're okay. Are we okay?" It was such a simple question, but I didn't have a simple answer. We weren't okay. We might not be okay for a long time, but we were together and we would survive this. We will be. I said. It might take time, but we'll get through this. My phone started buzzing with notifications, news alerts, texts from people I hadn't heard from in years, social media mentions. The story had broken. Within minutes, my phone was ringing constantly. Reporters wanting comments, neighbors expressing shock, former clients asking if their books were safe. I turned off my phone and looked at Lucas. We should probably go somewhere away from home at least for tonight. Do you want to drive to your grandmother's in Florida? He nodded, looking dazed. Yeah, that sounds good. We went home just long enough to pack bags, moving quickly before any reporters could arrive. As I threw clothes into a suitcase, I looked around our bedroom, this room I'd shared with Richard for nearly 2 decades, and tried to remember if there had been any genuine moments, any real connection, or had it all been performance manipulation, a long con that I'd fallen for completely. I didn't know, and maybe I never would. We were back in the car within 20 minutes, heading south on the interstate. In the passenger seat, Lucas was silent, staring out the window at the passing landscape. I wanted to comfort him, to promise him that everything would be okay, but I wasn't sure I believed it myself. My phone, which I turned back on, rang an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Mrs. Brennan, this is Amanda Keating. My husband and I invested $200,000 with your husband's company 3 years ago. Money we'd saved our entire lives for retirement. Money that's now gone. I need to know what you're going to do to help us get it back." Her voice was shaking with anger and grief, and I felt a wave of guilt, even though I'd done nothing wrong. "I'm so sorry for what happened to you, but I didn't know anything about my husband's business dealings. I'm a victim in this too. You lived in that house he bought with our money. You benefited from his crimes. You have to have some way to help us." "You don't." "Sorry. Truly am. But I can't help you." I hung up before she could respond. Within seconds my phone rang again. Another investor. Then another. I turned off the phone and threw it in my purse. Were those the people Richard stole from? Lucas asked quietly. They're mad at you. That's not fair. You didn't do anything wrong. I wish that were entirely true. I'd sign documents without reading them. I trusted when I should have questioned. I'd been willfully blind to signs that something was wrong. Maybe I hadn't committed crimes, but I wasn't completely innocent either. We drove in silence for a while, the sun setting behind us as we headed south. Finally, Lucas said, "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Of course." Did Richard ever actually love us, or was it all fake? It was the same question I'd been asking myself since this nightmare began, and I still didn't have an answer. "I think he loved us in whatever way he was capable of loving anyone," I said carefully. "But Richard isn't like other people. He doesn't think the way we think. He doesn't feel things the way we feel things. Love for him might have been something different than what we understand it to be." "That's a really sad answer." "No." We stopped for the night at a hotel in Georgia, paying cash because I wasn't sure if our credit cards would still work. In our room, I tried calling Janet but got her voicemail. I tried Detective Webb with the same result. Everyone was dealing with the aftermath of Richard's arrest, and I was just one of many people affected. I turned on the television and immediately saw Richard's face on the news. The reporter was standing outside his office building describing the arrest, listing the charges, interviewing shocked colleagues who couldn't believe Richard Brennan had done such things. "He seemed so normal," one woman said. "So trustworthy. How could someone like that be a criminal?" That was the question everyone would be asking. How could a successful businessman, a devoted husband, a pillar of the community be capable of such extensive fraud? The answer was simple, because none of it had been real. Richard Brennan, the person everyone thought they knew, had never existed. He'd been a carefully constructed character designed to gain trust and exploit it. Lucas and I lay in our separate hotel beds, watching the news coverage in silence. At some point, I heard him crying quietly. I went to his bed and held him, and he clung to me like he hadn't since he was a small child. "I'm scared," he whispered. "Me too, honey. Me too." The next morning I woke to find my phone, which I'd foolishly turned back on, filled with hundreds of messages. Most were from reporters, but there were also messages from friends, family, people I'd gone to high school with. Everyone wanted to know the same things. Had I known, was I involved? How could I have not seen it? One message stood out from the rest. It was from Detective Webb, sent at 6 o'clock in the morning. "Mrs. Brennan, please call me as soon as possible. We've discovered something about your husband's plans that you need to know." With shaking hands I called him back. "Mrs. Brennan, thank you for calling. I need to ask you some questions about your husband's activities over the past few months. Specifically, I need to know if Richard ever discussed moving overseas with you." "No, never." "Why?" "Because we've discovered that he'd already moved most of the stolen money to accounts in the Cayman Islands. He'd rented a villa there under an assumed name. And Mrs. Brennan, he'd purchased 3 plane tickets to Grand Cayman for tomorrow, Friday. But only 3 tickets. 1 for himself and 2 for people named Marcus Chun and David Holloway." "I don't know those people." "Marcus Chun is the financial consultant I told you about. David Holloway doesn't appear to exist. It's likely a fake identity. Mrs. Brennan, your husband wasn't planning to take you and your son with him when he ran. He was planning to leave you behind to face the consequences while he disappeared with an accomplice." The words hit me like a physical blow. He'd been planning to abandon us. Not just leave us, but actively set us up to take the fall for his crimes. "There's more," Detective Webb continued. "We found documents in your husband's office, forged letters supposedly from you to various investors, emails that appeared to come from your account discussing the investment schemes. He was building a case to make it look like you were involved, possibly even the mastermind behind everything. Why would he do that? Because if investigators were focused on you, they might not look as closely at where the money actually went. You were going to be his scapegoat, Mrs. Brennan, while you were being investigated and potentially prosecuted. He would have been living comfortably in the Caribbean. I felt like I was going to be sick. This man I'd loved, this man I trusted with my life and my son's future, had been planning to frame me for his crimes, to send me to prison while he escaped. What do I do?" My voice came out as barely a whisper. "You cooperate fully with our investigation. You help us build a case that clearly establishes your innocence. And Mrs. Brennan, you think whatever instincts made you question those bank documents, because if you'd signed them, if you'd waited even a few more days before getting suspicious, you might be facing federal charges right now instead of Richard." After I hung up, I sat on the edge of the hotel bed, staring at nothing. Lucas was still asleep in the other bed, and I was grateful for that. I needed time to process this latest revelation before I had to explain it to him. My husband, the man I thought I knew, had been planning to destroy me. Not just leave me, but actively ruin my life to cover his escape. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. My phone rang again. This time it was Janet. "Catherine, I've been trying to reach you. We need to talk strategy. The investors' attorneys are filing civil suits, and your name is on several of them. They're arguing that as Richard's wife, you benefited from the stolen money and should be held financially responsible for returning it. But I didn't know anything. I didn't benefit. You lived in a house partially purchased with stolen funds. You drove a car leased through one of Richard's shell companies. Your son's private school tuition was paid from accounts containing investor money. Legally, you did benefit even if you didn't know the source of the funds. So they can take everything from me. Even though I'm a victim too. They're going to try. But Catherine, we're going to fight back. I've already filed motions establishing you as an innocent spouse, arguing that you had no knowledge of the fraud and shouldn't be held liable for your husband's criminal actions. It's not going to be easy and it's not going to be quick, but we will protect you. How long will this take? Years probably. Cases like this are complex and there are a lot of moving parts. The federal case against Richard, the civil suits from investors, the asset forfeit proceedings, all of it has to work through the system. You need to prepare yourself for a long fight. Years. I was going to be dealing with this for years. My son was going to grow up with this hanging over us. Our lives were never going to be the same. After I hung up with Janet, I sat in that hotel room and let myself cry for the first time since this all began. Not quiet tears, but deep wrenching sobs that came from somewhere primal. I cried for the marriage I thought I had. For the life I'd built that turned out to be a fiction. For my son, who would carry the stigma of his stepfather's crimes into his adult life. For the woman I'd been just a week ago, who thought she understood her life. Lucas woke up and found me crying. Without a word. He came and sat next to me, putting his arm around my shoulders. We sat like that for a long time, mother and son, holding each other while our world fell apart. Eventually I pulled myself together. We checked out of the hotel and continued driving to Florida, to my mother's house, to the only refuge I could think of. As we drove, I made plans. I would cooperate with the investigation. I would fight the civil suits. I would protect my son and rebuild our lives. I would survive this because that's what survivors do. But I would never trust anyone completely again. Richard had taught me that lesson too well. 3 years later, I stood in a courtroom watching Richard receive his sentence. 22 years in federal prison for wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. The judge's words echoed through the chamber, but I felt nothing. The man being led away in handcuffs was a stranger to me now. The civil suits had been settled 6 months earlier. Janet had successfully argued that I was an innocent spouse, that I'd been deceived and manipulated just like the investors. The court agreed. My house was sold to help repay victims, but I was allowed to keep my business assets and a small portion of our savings. It wasn't much, but it was enough to start over. Lucas and I had moved to a small apartment near my mother's place in Florida. He'd finished high school there, made new friends, applied to colleges using financial aid and scholarships since his college fund had been seized. He was stronger now, more resilient than I'd ever imagined a teenager could be. The investigators who Richard had supposedly hired never materialized. That had been another lie, another layer of his manipulation. He'd simply been so paranoid about being caught that he'd convinced himself I was suspicious when in reality I'd been completely oblivious until that day at the bank. But here's what Richard hadn't counted on. His paranoia had saved me. If he hadn't pushed too hard with those bank documents, if he'd been more patient, I might have signed away my rights without question. His desperation to secure his escape route had been his downfall and my salvation. I'd started volunteering at a legal aid clinic that helped victims of financial fraud. Turned out my bookkeeping skills and personal experience made me uniquely qualified to help others spot the warning signs I'd missed. I'd helped dozens of people protect themselves from schemes similar to Richard's. Standing in that courthouse watching my former husband shuffle away in chains, I realized something important. He hadn't destroyed me. He tried, but I was still standing. Lucas was thriving. We'd survived. The prosecutor approached me after the sentencing. "Mrs. Brennan, your testimony was crucial to getting this conviction. Those investors got justice because you were brave enough to come forward." I nodded, accepting the compliment but not needing it. I hadn't testified for recognition. I testified because it was right, because staying silent would have made me complicit in Richard's lies. That evening, Lucas and I had dinner at a small restaurant near our apartment. Nothing fancy, nothing extravagant, just a simple meal together, mother and son, building a life that was modest but honest. Do you ever miss him? Lucas asked. I miss who I thought he was, I admitted. But that person never existed. So no, I don't miss Richard. I miss the illusion. Lucas nodded, understanding in a way that broke my heart. Number 16-year-old should have to develop that kind of wisdom. We drove home through warm Florida evening air. And I thought about the future. Lucas would go to college in the fall. I would keep building my business, keep helping fraud victims, keep moving forward. The past 3 years had been hell, but we'd made it through. Richard had tried to make me his victim, his scapegoat, his casualty. Instead, he'd made me stronger, more independent, more aware of my own worth. I was 46 years old, starting over with almost nothing. But I had my son, my integrity, and my freedom, and that was everything. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them.